Greenland looks remote, but it is not a blank space on the map. It is a northern hinge between North America, Europe, the Arctic, and the North Atlantic. That is why this story is not only about ice, or minerals, or one military base. It is about warning time, access, reinforcement, and control of the northern approaches. Greenland is becoming the Arctic frontline for NATO, not because armies are about to fight across the ice, but because modern power begins before open conflict. It begins with sensors, it begins with bases, it begins with runways, routes, cables, satellites, minerals, and the ability to see a crisis before it reaches the main map. That is the core of the story. Greenland matters because too many strategic maps now overlap in the same place. Start with geography. Greenland is the world's largest island, but size is not the main point. Location is. To the west, there is North America. To the east, there is Europe. To the north, there is the Arctic. To the south and southeast, there is the North Atlantic. That position makes Greenland a hinge. It links the defense of North America with the defense of Europe. It sits above sea lanes that would matter in a major crisis with Russia. And it stands near the northern approaches that connect the Arctic to the Atlantic. For most people, Greenland still looks distant. But strategy often turns distant places into central places. A remote place can matter more than a crowded city if it sits near the routes that decide who can move, who can see, and who can reinforce. Greenland is one of those places. It is not a battlefield in the normal sense. It is a place where warning begins. It is a place where tracking begins. It is a place where access begins. That is why the United States is already there. The key location is Pittavik Base, formerly called Thule Base, on the northwest coast of Greenland. It is not just an American base in the ice. It supports missile warning, missile defense, space surveillance, and satellite command and control. That mission matters because the shortest routes between Russia and North America cross the polar region. In a crisis, minutes matter, detection matters, tracking matters. A base in Greenland can watch the northern approaches from a position the bases farther south cannot replace in the same way. So Greenland is more than a map feature. It is part of the defense architecture of North America and the wider alliance. It is a sensor position. It is a warning platform. It is a strategic point between the Atlantic and the polar approaches. That alone would make Greenland important, but the northern map changed again when Finland and Sweden joined NATO. Before that, NATO already had major Arctic members, including Canada, Denmark, Iceland, Norway, and the United States. Finland and Sweden added deeper Nordic geography, more infrastructure, and more experience in northern defence. They also connected the Baltic, the High North, and the Arctic more tightly. This does not mean NATO controls the Arctic. That would be too simple. Russia remains the largest Arctic power by geography, coastline, military infrastructure, and long experience in extreme northern operations. But the political map is different now. 7 of the 8 Arctic states are NATO members. Russia is the exception. That creates a new strategic reality. The Arctic is no longer a distant region where Russia could assume that NATO would remain divided. Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Iceland, Canada, and the United States now face the same larger question. How do they defend the northern approaches? How do they monitor Russian movement? How do they protect reinforcement routes across the North Atlantic? And how do they operate a region where weather, distance, darkness, ice, and limited infrastructure are part of the battlefield? This is where Russia enters the picture. The real concern is not a Russian army marching across the ice toward Greenland. That image misses the point. The issue is access. It is denial. It is submarines. It is missiles. It is sensors. It is the ability to threaten the North Atlantic from the Russian Arctic. The Kola Peninsula is central to that problem. It supports Russia's Northern Fleet. It is linked to Russia's nuclear deterrent. And it is a gateway between the Russian Arctic and the wider Atlantic system. For NATO, the northern problem is not only about defending Norway or watching the Barents Sea. It is also about making sure Russian forces cannot use the Arctic to gain an advantage in the Atlantic. That means tracking submarines. It means protecting reinforcement routes between North America and Europe. It means keeping early warning credible, and it means making sure no power can move through the northern approaches without being watched. In that larger picture, Greenland becomes a strategic anchor. It is not the whole map. But it is one of the places where the map becomes visible. Then comes the ice. The issue is not the cold itself. The issue is what the cold used to block. Ice is an operational barrier. It limits shipping. It limits patrols. It limits infrastructure. It changes surveillance. It makes movement harder. When there is less ice, the Arctic does not become easy. It is still cold, distant, dark, and dangerous, but it can become more accessible. More access means longer navigation windows. It means more vessels. It means more patrols. It means more pressure on ports, runways, sensors, undersea awareness and resilient communications. So melting ice is not the whole story. It is the condition that makes the rest of the story more urgent. A frozen barrier is becoming a more active strategic space. Greenland sits inside that transition. There is also the question of resources. Greenland has critical minerals that matter for modern industry, energy systems, electronics, and defense supply chains. These materials are not only commercial goods. They sit behind radar systems, advanced weapons, communications, batteries, military aviation and high technology. For the United States and Europe, this matters because supply chains are now part of strategic competition. Western governments do not want to depend too heavily on China for the minerals and processing behind modern defense technology. Greenland is not a simple answer. Mining there is difficult. Infrastructure is limited. The environment is harsh. Local politics matter. And the people of Greenland have the right to shape their own economic future, but the strategic interest is clear. A large island, inside the NATO space, with mineral potential, and located between North America and Europe, will never be just a remote territory on a map. It becomes part of a larger contest over industrial security. That is why Greenland is both military geography and industrial geography. It matters for warning and access. It also matters for the supply chains behind the systems that modern militaries use. But there is a political reality that cannot be ignored. Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark. It also has its own government, its own political voice, and a strong sense of identity and autonomy. The island cannot be treated as an empty chessboard. It is not just something for Washington, Moscow, Brussels, or Copenhagen to discuss over a map. People live there. Local consent matters. Danish sovereignty matters. Greenlandic autonomy matters. Any serious Arctic strategy has to deal with that fact. This is where simple narratives fail. Greenland is not important because someone can simply take it, buy it, or turn it into a base. It is important because its geography, resources, and defense role make it impossible to ignore, while its politics make it impossible to treat casually. That tension is the Strategic Faultline, the United States' once reliable northern warning and defense. NATO wants a stronger Arctic posture. Denmark wants to defend the Arctic and North Atlantic parts of the kingdom. Greenland wants development, autonomy, and control over its future. Europe wants more secure access to critical minerals. Russia wants to preserve its Arctic military advantages. And China, although not an Arctic state, has long shown interest in Arctic access, infrastructure, and resources. These interests do not create a traditional front line, they create pressure before war. Modern competition often begins before the first shot. It begins with sensors, with bases, with routes, with supply chains, with undersea access, with runways, with early warning, with political influence. That is why Greenland matters. In the old imagination, the Arctic was empty space above the real map. In the new strategic reality, the Arctic is part of the map, and Greenland is one of its most important hinges. It links North America to Europe. It links the Arctic to the Atlantic. It links missile warning to maritime reinforcement. It links melting ice to future access, and it links critical minerals to defense supply chains. For NATO, Greenland is not the only Arctic problem, but it may be the clearest symbol of what the Arctic is becoming, a region where distance no longer means safety, where ice no longer guarantees isolation, where radar, submarines, ports, minerals, routes and sovereignty all converge. The next strategic frontier may not look like a battlefield at all. It may look like ice, rock, and silence. Until you understand the map, if you found this analysis useful, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next report.